Done.
Okay.
It does not come out. There you go.
There it is. Okay, great. Then we are ready to go then. Director Margaret Wallace Brown, are you ready?
I am.
Okay, well then we'll go ahead and start then. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is 3 p.m. on Tuesday, July 12th, 2022. I am Sonny Garza, who along with Lisa Clark, co-chair the Livable Places Action Committee. I call this meeting to order as a virtual meeting using Microsoft's Teams. At this committee meeting, public speakers may speak up to 2 minutes at the end of the meeting at the time designated on the agenda. For the moment, I would ask you to please mute yourself and turn off your camera during the meeting. If you are joining us via telephone, please use *6 to mute and unmute. Committee members, if you would like to speak during the meeting, I remind you to use the raise your hand feature or unmute and state your name so that you can be recognized by the chair. I will take this moment to mention that the raise your hand feature is only for subcommittee members and not for the public at large. We will recognize you at the end of the meeting during public comment. So committee members, please prepare to answer the roll call by unmuting yourself. And that is such a good picture of me. That is about 12 years old. Thank you very much. All right, so when I call your name, please respond by saying your last name and or present. And I will begin with the chair. Sonny Garza is present. Lisa Clark, the co-chair, will not be present today. Bradley Pepper. Bradley Pepper is not present. Casey Morgan. Casey Morgan is not present. Curtis Davis.
Davis is present.
Mr. Davis is present, thank you. Dr. Sherry Smith.
Smith is present.
Dr. Smith is present, thank you. Dustin O'Neill. Dustin O'Neill is not present. Sean Masick. Sean Masick is not present. Fernando Zemaripa. Fernando Zemaripa is not present. Jeff Kaplan. Jeff Kaplan is not present. Kathy Payton.
Kathy Payton is present.
Kathy Payton is present, thank you. Kirby Liu. Kirby Liu is not present. Lloyd Smith. Commissioner Smith is not present. Luis Guajardo. Luis Guajardo is not present. Matthew Camp.
Camp is present.
Matthew Camp is present, thank you. Megan Sigler.
Sigler present.
Commissioner Sigler is present, thank you. Mark Nightingale. Mark Nightingale is not present. Mike Dishberger. Mike Dishberger is not present. Neil Dykeman. Neil Dykeman is not present. Omar Isfar.
Omar Isfar present.
Omar Isfar is present. Thank you, sir. Peter Friedman.
Friedman present.
Peter Friedman is present. Thank you. Sandy Stevens. Sandy Stevens.
Oh, Sandy Stevens present.
Sandy Stevens is present. Thank you. Scott Kubler. Scott Kubler is not present. Steve Curry.
Curry present.
Steve Curry is present. Thank you. Toby Cole.
Toby Cole present.
Toby Cole is present. Tyron McDaniel. Mr. McDaniel is not present. Yahuna Mahmood. Yahuna Mahmood is not present. Zion Escobar. Zion Escobar is not present. I show 12 subcommittee members in attendance along with Director Margaret Wallace Brown and Savita Vandy. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so
Sonny,
much
Mike
for taking the time.
Dishberger present.
I'm sorry, who's present?
Mike Dishberger, I'm sorry.
Mr. Dishberger, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. For those of you that may have missed the roll call and are now present and did not hear your name, please speak up now and identify yourself. All right, hearing none, we will go ahead and move forward.
We
A
have,
little quick, hello?
sorry, Mr. Chair, we have Tyron McDaniel who just joined, but I think he's having issues with microphone.
Okay, all right, well, we know that Mr. McDaniel is present and hope that he'll be able to join us momentarily. Thank you, sir. All right, just a couple of little housekeeping things about virtual meeting instructions and how best to participate, and I'll make this quick. After joining the meeting, stay muted with your camera turned off to minimize background disruptions. If you wish to speak, enter your name into the chat and you will be called in the order received. If you're using a cell phone, please use *6 to mute and unmute yourself. And the chair will call on any individuals from the public to speak. Please state your name, spell your last name out loud, unless staff has done that for you already. Again, that will happen at the end of the meeting. A verbal recording of this meeting is important. Please speak as slowly and clearly as possible. Chat may not be used for anything other than public speaker request or basic staff administration information. Again, it is to be used by the public and by committee members for committee meeting information only. Again, the hand raise feature is to be used only by committee members and staff, not the public. Public comments will be heard verbally at the end of this meeting as designated on the agenda. At the end, when the meeting is adjourned, please disconnect or hang up all devices. All right. With that, again, I will ask again if there are any new members, any subcommittee members that are in attendance who missed the roll call. Anyone else? Mr. McDaniel,
Yes,
are you there?
Tyron McDaniel reporting.
Thank you, sir. It's a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much. All right, with that, I will hand this the chair over to Margaret Wallace-Brown for the director's report. Director Wallace-Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everybody, for being with us again today in this very warm July day. I hope you're spending some time cool on virtual meetings with us. Thank you for being here. One brief announcement. I want to make sure everybody is aware that the city is currently undergoing a redistricting process. Every 10 years based on census data, we have to look at the council district populations and adjust them accordingly so that they are not materially unbalanced. We are currently, we have a proposed plan that we have published on our website at letstalkhouston.org/redistricting. And the first public hearings to hear from you about your opinion on the proposed plans take place tomorrow, one at 9 a.m. and one at 7 p.m. physically located in City Hall, but there is also a virtual component for them. And then there is also another one next Wednesday at 9 a.m. again at City Hall or virtually. Go to letstalkhouston.org/redistricting to find out more. And I do encourage everybody to participate in the redistricting effort. It matters greatly. I'm going to mute myself and I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Wallace-Brown. I was muted there for a second. I heard someone else speak up. Are there any other subcommittee members that have since joined us? All right, then. Hearing none, we'll move forward. Again, a reminder, please mute yourself and *6 for the duration of the meeting unless you are called upon to speak. I will now turn this meeting over to Suvita Bandy. Suvita.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I see that Sean Messak has joined the meeting. If we can acknowledge that.
Mr. Masek, are you there?
I'm trying.
You're there,
Yes.
sir. We can hear you.
Okay. People weren't
All right,
hearing me
you are
earlier
in.
today.
All
So
right. That
excellent.
raises us up to 15 committee members. Thank you so much. Again, Suvita Bandy.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, Mr. Chair and committee members. In the agenda for today, we will continue the discussion and recommend changes to a few types of reserves, go over some technical amendment recommendations to the multifamily section, and present progress of the committee's work. After that, we will present the upcoming expectations in the next steps. We will have time for public comments at the end. Let me invite Tammy Williamson to present the reserves. Over to Tammy.
Tammy, are you there?
It'd be helpful if I could unmute myself.
Oh, there you are. We can hear you now.
Yep.
Go right ahead,
Good
please.
afternoon, committee members. We are continuing the discussion about a few of the type of reserves and staff's recommendations. Staff is looking for consensus from the committee for the proposed recommendations. As discussed last meeting, the City of Houston has two main land use classifications. One is a lot, single-family residential development. The second is reserve, which is anything other than what meets the definition for single-family residential. We will be discussing recreation reserves and parking reserves, both related to residential developments. The first type of reserve for today's discussion is reserve restricted to recreation. As discussed last time, the ordinance currently only allows a recreation reserve to have frontage on a public street or type 1 PAE. Staff recommends to add more options for where a recreation reserve can be added to a subdivision by not just allowing it on a public street or type 1 PAE, but also on a type 2 PAE and shared driveways, for when these types of developments would like to provide this type of larger amenity for the residents. We recommend to maintain the same requirements currently in place for minimum size and frontage. Some of the comments from the committee members last meeting were about the why of the frontage requirement. A recreation reserve is intended to be used for larger community amenities that would propose occupiable structures, like a swimming pool or a clubhouse. These uses, we feel, still require this frontage length for maintenance and guest attendance. If the intent is to provide amenity areas that are playgrounds, picnic areas, pergolas, dog runs, etc., these can be constructed within landscape and open space reserve, which have zero size and frontage requirements. The next reserve type for today's discussion is parking reserves, which are required when a certain number of lots within a shared driveway or type 2 PAE subdivision within the city is proposed. Currently, the ordinance regulates the minimum number to be provided. The ordinance specifies that the parking space shall be accessible to all residents of each dwelling unit of the subdivision plat. For most developments that have multiple shared driveways or type 2 PAEs or are required more than one additional parking space, they spread out the parking reserves. Sometimes, however, there are a few instances where the location of the provided parking reserve or reserves are not accessible within the subdivision to several lots. Staff recommends to elaborate and better define accessible in the ordinance language to add that the parking reserve should have a pedestrian connection within the development. This connection can be along the shared driveway or type 2 PAE, or from a landscape or open space reserve, or even a pedestrian access easement within a lot. This will help all guests to any residents within the subdivision to easily and safely visit any of the lots. The second issue that we would like to address about parking reserves is its placement, specifically when proposed to be located adjacent to the right-of-way. Based on the discussion at last month's meeting, staff is recommending that the parking reserves be located at least 20 feet from the right-of-way edge, adjacent to major thoroughfares, major collectors, and existing high comfort bike lanes. The reason for this recommendation is solely based on safety. The diagrams on the screen are of ASHTO's passenger vehicle turning exhibits. With a minimum turning radius of 24 feet for the passenger design vehicle, the additional guest parking spaces should be located to ensure maneuverability where a vehicle is not needing multiple point turns. Pulling in and needing to back out to adjust onto these types of roadways with potentially higher rates of speed and drivers and cyclists not accustomed to residential traffic backing out of driveways. Last meeting, we also discussed some issues related to compensating open space reserves. The intent of COS is as common open space restricted for the use of the residents of the subdivision when the lot sizes are reduced without restricting lot coverage. The current ordinance requirements for COS are shown on the screen. We have decided that we need more time to thoroughly consider how the ordinance should reflect its intent better, so we will take this time and not rush into any conclusions. This will not be part of this committee's scope, nor included in the ordinance amendments that we are currently drafting. Are there any questions related to the reserves and staff's recommendations?
Thank you, Tommy. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, are there questions for Ms. Williamson regarding what you have just heard? We're looking for consensus on recreational reserves, parking reserves, and we will not be discussing COS reserves today. So let's begin with recreational reserves. Are there questions or comments? Mr. Dishberger, go ahead, please.
Yes, the parking diagram with the 20-foot minimum. I am not in favor of that. I mean, you're showing the worst case scenario coming down a road and making a U-turn into a parking space, and 20 feet is too much. Yeah, there's the bad one. I don't think it should be that much. I think it should be more like 12 or something, so you can back, people back out of driveways all the time. This is like a driveway, and this is very common in residential to have something like this. We don't ban it on residential, single family residential. And again, the 20, what you're going to do is you're going to push this parking area, which is semi-common, where you put it near the main street, main drag. That's pretty common. And you'll probably end up losing another parking spot. You'll have some, I guess it's pretty, you'll have some grass there, but if it's a curb and gutter street, it's not 12 feet from the right of way to the property line, and looks like that in this picture also. It's usually about 12 feet. I don't agree with that, and I don't see the purpose of this. We discussed this last time, and some other people mentioned it also. And can we also on the first slide discuss what a pedestrian pathway would be? I'm sure I deal with some other things in the city, and they talk about pieces of land. When we say very obvious that the road here would be a pedestrian pathway, but if someone wanted to put a walkway, I'd probably suggest in this case, give us a width, 4 feet, 3 feet, to be able to access the place. And it doesn't need to be very big, but I'm a builder. Somebody may do 1 foot and call it a pedestrian walkway. So I suggest we have some minimum number, and I'm thinking 3 feet, possibly 4 as a pedestrian walkway. And of course, the road is going to be way more than that, like you're showing here. So kind of some positive comments on this slide. The other one, some negative comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. All right. I saw Commissioner Smith. Did you have your hand up, sir?
I did. I picking up on the previous speaker, I respect the difference of opinion, but on the thoroughfare designation, as I recall, Ms. Williamson, last time the 20-foot requirement was not as precisely worded here. You've amended it to be specific to major thoroughfares and collectors and high comfort bike lanes. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Yeah, so last time the recommendation was just in general, and that was part of our modification was for these particular road designations.
Right. So the previous comment that was just made said we have driveways on major thoroughfares, and it's something effective of that's less of a problem. I took issue with it to this extent. Is it's been 30 years now probably that the Chapter 42 was amended to prohibit single-family residential from fronting with front-loading lots on a major thoroughfare. So this one's, as worded currently, seems to address the broader restriction that was proposed last time and makes it more moderate and specific to major thoroughfares. And I do believe the major thoroughfare and major collector, both of which tend to be divided roads, are both kind of birds of a feather, and it seems consistent with that other provision that basically says a single family subdivision adjacent to a major thoroughfare should not have lots fronting it. So I find this one acceptable, is my opinion.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Smith. I see Mike Dishberger. Is your hand still up, sir?
Yes, it is. And I want to apologize. I use the word major thoroughfare for roads, okay? And I realize now, and as I read it, it actually has the word major thoroughfare, which to me would be like Sabita, or Ms. Williamson. Are we talking about like 20th Street is major thoroughfare to me? Shepherd, Durham, which we have that map in planning where you can look on the map, being a major
Exactly.
thoroughfare. This would not apply to a street like let's say 15th Street or something, or some other Sawyer or
Correct.
something. So
Yes,
if
it's
that's
as
true, then
designated on the
I
major
withdraw
thoroughfare
that
plan.
objection, because I do agree on the major thoroughfare. Again, we all have different terminology. I apologize. Thank you.
And not at all, sir. So Tammy, why don't you walk through again that the 20-foot right of way only affects 3 different street formats.
Exactly. And so as designated on the major thoroughfare and freeway plan, major thoroughfares, major collectors, and then from the planning department's bike plan, the actual existing high comfort bike lanes, not proposed, but on the ground existing high comfort bike lanes. Those would be the only 3 classifications where it would require the parking reserve to be located off of the edge of the right of way.
All right. Thank you. Mike, does that make sense to you, sir? Dishberger?
It does now, as I'm looking at that, and also see on your plat, I'm getting my eyes close to the screen. It says a 25-foot building line, which would be for a major thoroughfare anyway. So we're good now. We're good.
All right. So Tammy, let's go ahead and address the other issue that Mike brought up, and that was actually you had mentioned defining accessible, and Mike had just mentioned, is it a 4-foot walkway? Is it a 1-foot walkway? What is it? Can you enlighten us a little bit on that issue?
I think what we were thinking of would be the requirements of sidewalk, just what the current sidewalk ordinance would require of probably a minimum 5-foot sidewalk would be sufficient space to just move people.
Okay, and so Mike, I'm going to call on you in a minute. So the idea here is looking at the pictures that you have here, and these were, as you mentioned in a previous meeting, kind of difficult to find. Most of the developers are actually meeting the standards, and there's only a few. And the idea here is the properties on the north side of these drawings do not have access to parking. And so what we want to do is make sure that everyone who's coming to visit the development actually has access to guest parking. So again, let me open up the floor. I see Mike with his hand up. Mike, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I hate to keep talking. I can agree with the sidewalk, with the sidewalk ordinance, but I prefer not to have a sidewalk. If it's a walkway going from, let's say on the picture on the right, going from that driveway to the other driveway, I'd prefer something low impact like crushed gravel or something, and not make it. When you use the word sidewalk, that means concrete. You just say, hey, it has to be a 5-foot pathway. We can work with that. But okay, so
yeah, we're
again,
actually
terminology. It's important in these things.
Yeah, so
Tammy, go ahead.
how we were wanting to phrase it was just the pedestrian connection. So however that is constructed, crushed stone, great. What I was referring to was the width of what currently is in the sidewalk ordinance is what we would kind of mirror, but not the construction part of it, the material and the actual IDM standard construction for right-of-way sidewalks.
As an example, if this developer was doing driveways or trimming the drive or the PAE with brick, then that walkway, permeable brick, that walkway could be permeable brick, not poured concrete.
Yep.
Okay. So
just a safe path.
Yeah. So do we need to do language then specifically to address that issue so that, as Mike says, everyone looking at it doesn't think, oh, it's poured concrete. It can be any number of things. We could say permeable, concrete or a permeable surface, I suppose. You would know better than I.
I'm trying to think. I think Public Works also uses the term improved surface for some of their requirements. We could try to mimic some of that language because that lists like the permeable surfaces, that lists crushed stone, that lists all sorts of different clay, brick, concrete, whatever. So that would be an option.
Okay. I now see, first let me recognize Curtis Davis, and for the record, I see Kirby Liu is now in attendance. So Mr. Davis first and then Mr. Liu. Mr. Davis.
Just one comment. The code, I think, covers this, but whatever pathway is put in should be accessible. And I know you in the slide, the not just accessible was referencing another issue, but any pathway that's a pedestrian pathway should be accessible. So whatever surface material is used, it needs to meet ADA requirements.
Thank you. All right. Mr. Liu, are you there?
Well, I had the exact same comment. I had the exact same comment as Curtis. There might be a limit to the number of materials that could work as a pedestrian pathway, so that might be something to look into.
All right, that's a fair, yes, absolutely. And then Mr. Davis, do you have another comment? Mr. Davis, you're muted, but your hand is up, so I want to make sure I'm not missing you.
No, I'm just trying to find my hands down. I'm using a different device.
That's what I was thinking. All right, sir. All right, so subcommittee members, any other questions about reserves? Now, again, we talked about recreation reserves and parking reserves. Are there any other questions or comments before we move on?
Hey, Sunny, I have a question. It's Megan Sigler.
Go right ahead.
And Tammy, can you put that last slide back up, please? On the second drawing, and I think what I'm trying to understand is you're saying that you would want a sidewalk from the parking space through the lot number 3?
Potentially, if this were going to come in today, that there would be some, I mean, even because the shared driveway stops even before it gets to lot 3. So some sort of path, even if it's just right on the end, which isn't still much of an impact because building code would require a separation from property lines unless you're going to fire rate the structure. So it would still be minimal impact, but some sort of connection to be able to get to the other lots.
And I do see what you're saying, especially in a larger deal, a larger plat. In this case, what I would hate to see happen is the 50 by 100 foot lot could be subdivided into 3 and platted on its own. Is that correct, and not need parking?
Correct. Yeah, because how the ordinance reads, once you get 6 additional dwelling units,
and
then you need
so
an additional.
I'm a big proponent on when you own contiguous land, you plat it at one time, I just for other city rules. And I think this would almost be a loophole to allow someone to plat this as 2 different plats. For whatever that's worth. I don't know if there's a way to stop that, because it does appear that, oh, they've got the local street right there where they can provide a parking space on the street. That would be my only comment, that I just don't want a walkway, knowing how tight some of these sites are. You don't have 4 or 5 feet. You are doing fire rated right on the wall in a lot of these in-town situations.
Tammy, anything?
Savita.
Yes, Ms. Sigler, I thank you for that comment, actually. So in essence, to just reiterate and understand your comment, what you're saying is if we require that 5-foot connection, the pedestrian connection between the drives, it is possible that this could be submitted as 2 different plats instead of coming as 1 full plat with this design. Is that?
Yeah, and I think then you'd get less parking. Yeah. Okay. Less off-street parking.
That's something to think about. In this particular situation, I do hear the garage could actually be located right where we want the sidewalk to happen or the pathway to happen. That's a good comment.
Well, Savita, if I may.
This is Director Wallace-Brown. I think what Megan's trying to say is that it's encouraging the property owner to plat them separately, which may have some other unintended consequences.
Understood. Yes.
So, Director Wallace-Brown, the thing I was thinking about too is, and Commissioner Sigler, one of the things is right now you have to have 1 parking space for every 6 units. And I don't know that we're seeing people, developers kind of throwing that in and dividing those lots in half and doing 3 units with no parking and then another 3 units with no parking. So
we have been seeing that, Sunny, unfortunately.
We have seen that?
Yeah, we have been. And yes, I think it's something that in the suburbs, or I think if it's, I'm not quite sure if I'll get the roll right, but you don't have to, when you're replatting, you don't have to show all the contiguous land you own compared to when you're in, when something hasn't been platted, you do.
Yeah.
Which just seems like a big loophole on parking, on some other issues as well, but it's still out there, so.
Well, that's fair, certainly a fair statement and something that we need to keep an eye on. So Savita and Tammy, if you'd make a note on that, so maybe there's an opportunity to address that issue.
And I would say that, as you can see from multiple examples, this is actually, most of the time, the parking reserves are spaced really well out and connections are made. That's just how the design works. It took me many hours to find even these two examples. I knew of one in my head because I'd seen it and then just trying to find it again. So these are more rare than what we would think. Most of the time it is actually, and it works for the vast majority of projects that we see.
I still see Commissioner Smith with your hand up, Commissioner.
If there's no other discussion on the reserves or this parking question, I do want to revisit the comments that were made about compensating open space a little bit. I'd like to understand better what's being tabled and why.
Tammy?
Yeah, so I would kind of really like to look at COS because there are examples that it doesn't meet the intent, but to find how we would want to phrase the ordinance, because there was a lot of discussion at last meeting about, how do we do distance, like would it be distance away, the lot's distance from the COS, or how do we actually make it usable, accessible? How do we actually put that into the ordinance language, not be so restrictive, but be enough wording to get the intent actually fulfilled. So it was going to take a lot more looking into it, a lot more than just throwing up an answer and then just to get it in the timeline of this committee's work. So I still really want to visit COS and to make it a better product, but just not in the timeline that's happening for Livable Places.
Commissioner, I think the issue is we know it. We know what we want when we see it, and we know what we don't want when we see it. But it's really hard, I think, to get the language specific enough that still allows the developers to do what they want to do and have more control while at the same time fulfilling the ordinance. So I think, as Ms. Williams has said, I think there are issues with the language and the restrictions and so on. So going forward, and I think that is the reason we're looking at giving ourselves a little more time to get there, because again, we know what we want. It's just really hard to put it down specifically on paper.
Well, let me ask it this way: we're deferring it to a later meeting, or it's being removed from the committee's scope, and we'll have to wait till another opportunity to revise Chapter 42 comes around?
Yes, sir. It is being removed from the scope of Livable Places. So it's not going to be within this draft ordinance package that will go to City Council.
Well, mark me down as disappointed. Me
too. Me too.
We've wrestled with this just as recently as the last commissioners court or the last planning commission meeting with an unusual situation and a suburban one, and I've raised the issue of the mismatch between geographic areas within the commission scope that haven't been explained to my satisfaction, and I'm disappointed to hear that y'all are making that decision.
Let me jump in for a moment and kind of take responsibility for that decision. This is Director Wallace Brown. We have always had the timeline established that this committee really wraps up their deliberative work on new ideas, new concepts at the end of this summer, moving then into the engagement and red line review and so forth through the fall, with the intent that we'll have our last pieces to City Council in January. When we started off this process, that was our timeline, and that has to remain our timeline for a variety of reasons. And while I agree with you and Tammy that this is an important topic that needs work, it became clear to us after the first conversation we had with this committee that it needs a lot more work and a lot more deliberative work than what we're capable of, than what we have the capacity to do right now, given the fact that we need to have this work to City Council by the end of the year. So I regretfully agreed that it just needs to come off the agenda, and we will attack it at some very near future, but I can't let all of the other good work that this committee has done be held up for that conversation and that more tough conversation to have. So yeah, I hear you, Lloyd, that it doesn't make you happy. It doesn't make Tammy happy. It doesn't make me happy either. But we have to make sure that we get this ready to go to council by the end of the year, and that would have caused a real problem with that.
Okay, thank you for the explanation.
Yeah, so apologies, ladies and gentlemen, but an executive decision has been made. So let me just go there instead. All right then. So Tammy, are we then finished with this? And should I be asking for consensus from the group?
Yes, please ask for consensus.
All right. So committee members, what we're looking for is consensus, and that is a yes, of course, on the two reserves that we discussed today, which were recreational reserves, which are giving more access, and the parking reserves, which we've just finished discussing. So are there any more comments or questions about those two items before I ask for consensus? All right, hearing none. Wait. All right. I don't see any hands up. So with that, if I hear no no's, I'm going to assume we have consensus. Is that correct, committee members? All right, then, Tammy, we will count that as an approval. Then we can now move on to the next section, which is Suvita, I believe.
It's still Tammy. Yep. Let her have it this time.
Oh, okay.
So the next topic is about some technical amendment recommendations to the multifamily section of the Platting and Development Ordinance. These technical amendments have been coordinated with our planning staff in the Permitting Center and the Fire Marshal's Office from issues and or points of confusion during the multifamily review process. So first up, section 42-232 currently limits the private street length without a turnaround provided to 200 feet. However, fire code limits this distance to 150 feet. So staff recommends this change to be consistent with the more restrictive code. Section 26-523 is in the parking ordinance, outlines the requirement for loading berths when provided. Staff proposes to add an additional subsection to require an unobstructed height clearance of no less than 12 feet to ensure there is adequate height for larger vehicles. We also propose to create a separate section within Chapter 42 for PAEs specifically. Currently, the regulation concerning their design is taken from the portions of the multifamily division that detail provisions for private streets and fire protection, while other portions are not relevant to the PAE development type. Staff does not propose any changes to the regulations themselves, same length, turnaround, and fire protection requirements. And finally, staff proposes to remove the open space requirements for multifamily developments in the ETJ from the ordinance. Inside of the city, we have parks dedication and payment in lieu of per dwelling unit. This section is only for multifamily in the ETJ. Harris, Montgomery, and Fort Bend County engineers have expressed their intent not to have this requirement placed upon them. Staff recommends to remove the open space requirement for multifamily developments from Houston's Code of Ordinances and instead let each county's requirement prevail. There are a couple other proposed minor changes, or even more minor changes, that do not alter how multifamily projects are currently reviewed, but are needed for further clarification. And then, are there any questions about this section?
All right, thank you, Ms. Williamson. All right, so as Tammy has stated, these are more technical changes to the multifamily, and let me open the floor for discussions. Commissioner Smith.
This is related to our functions here at Harris County. First, commend you for removing the open space that was essentially, well, let's just say it was not enforced. On the point of access, the clarity here of the street, what we found increasingly for multifamily development within the county's jurisdiction is that the application of the applicable fire code has a certain set of requirements that relate to the access. And I couldn't quote you the exact rule, but it has to do with the shape, the number of entrances, and a diagonal measurement across the site. Essentially, if you're too narrow a frontage and you have a long, skinny tract, the fire code requirements can say your second point is going to have to be on one of those other three sides beside the main frontage. That's covered in the fire code, and we've kind of worked together between our review here at the county and your review for Chapter 42 compliance, but they still remain a bit separated. We're reviewing for that particular space constraint and access requirement based on fire code, and you're looking at it, and we have two parties working in parallel. And I'm just wondering, have you given consideration as to whether this point of access for multifamily could be tightened up in a way where those linkages that we've established somewhat informally could be more formalized in some reasonable way?
So I know you brought up the 2 points of access. That's actually one of the ones that we're just going to modify a diagram to be more clear about what classifies as being 2 points of access. But so what do you mean by a more formal, as opposed to just having our numbers agree with the fire code, the length without, the first one is without a turnaround, a single point of access can't be greater than, now what the fire code is saying, 150 feet instead of 200 feet. Not when it's 2 points and how separated or any of that.
Yeah, this has to do with the turnaround, so I misread that
Okay.
as you presented it. But no, I'm speaking more specifically of apartments or rental single-family home situations, which are platted as reserve, or a mobile home park, all of which, from a fire code perspective, fall in the multifamily category, and the measurement diagonally and the frontage requirements apply in the county enforcement of our code. And I don't think we have that as tightly coordinated with Chapter 42 as it might be, and I don't know what the pros and cons are, but now's the time to ask the question, I thought.
Okay, I guess just to provide further information, in the city, when they go for permit, they actually have a separate multifamily review where a member of the fire marshal's team is sitting with planning and goes through every single site development for compliance with Chapter 42 and compliance with fire code. And so there's some things that the fire code will require in addition to Chapter 42 that Chapter 42 doesn't cover. But instead of being repetitive and trying to match every single thing that the fire code requires, we just let that still be the most restrictive and then have kind of the basic points in Chapter 42. I don't know if I'm being more helpful or not.
No, that's a reasonable position, because I would agree bringing a lot of fire code coordination into Chapter 42 is not a recipe for simplicity or clarity necessarily. All right, we've talked it through. Thank you for indulging me. I think we're okay.
Thank you, sir. All right, Mr. Davis, I saw your hand up. Did you still have a comment?
Yes, just
ahead,
in
sir.
general, in terms of deferring to the counties in which an ETJ, a lot in an ETJ exists, is that a general policy around these types of regulations, or are you being discrete and specific? What's the overall framework for this?
Are you talking about that open space section of the ordinance?
I was looking. Yes, and it made sense to defer to the county in which that ETJ parcel exists. And I was just asking, was it just considered to be an overall approach that you would follow, or is this just unique to this and a few discrete regulations?
So this is, I'll give just a brief history. Back when we had the ordinance, which was urban and suburban, then we had open space requirements. When we established the parks sector where you'd actually pay into for park development or dedicate park space, then we took out city from this open space requirement, but left it for the ETJ. And then so now what we've heard from the county engineer's offices is that they don't want this regulation that will apply to them. And so that's why, so it's been slowly chipped away until it's discovered that it's just not either needed or desired.
Well, what raised it in my mind was when I read this, I was thinking also of stormwater management. And if in a particular geography in an ETJ, a group of developers got together and said, we want to do stormwater management for these parcels on this parcel over here, would this kind of consideration restrict that, or would it facilitate that?
If I may, this is Suvida Bandy. The portion where we said this is for we are only talking about this particular section 42-236. We're not talking about all of chapter 42. It's just for this section that is written as if it applies only for the ETJ. That's the portion we are removing.
I understand that, and what I was trying to read into the rest of the chapter 42 impacts on the ETJ, and generally, I'm trying to discern from the specific a general approach that you're taking to these regulatory changes, or is this so discrete that it doesn't suggest any general approach where we're trying to address development issues? And again, I'm thinking of some of the larger issues like stormwater management and some of the larger systemic issues that this implies.
Yeah, Mr. Davis, I think, and Suvita will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think basically what we're saying is this ordinance, this part of the ordinance was written in, it really is, not to say an error, but it's of no real use today. And so it's not part of an overall strategy dealing with counties in the ETJ. It is specific to 42-236. So
yes, sir.
Great.
Yeah,
Right.
Perfect.
Not
You
indicative
answered
of
my
the relationship between ourselves and the county, only that this is an ordinance that really has seen its demise over time.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, Mike Tischberger, you have your hand up. Go ahead, sir.
So I've got just a clarification. So I don't have chapter 42 in front of me. 42-232. Your title of this whole thing is multifamily. When you say multifamily, to me, that means apartments. Are we talking single family homes and it's 150?
No.
Shaking your head, Tammy?
Exactly. So this is just, there's a scope at the very beginning of the division that covers all of the multifamily section in chapter 42, and it's just for multifamily, not single family home neighborhoods. It is multifamily, single tract, like the multiple rental homes.
Okay, so it is multifamily in truth. All right, so
yes,
no question then.
All right then, ladies and gentlemen, any other comments from the committee members? All right then, Tammy, I believe we need consensus on these two on these technical items as well, do we not?
Yes, please.
All right then, ladies and gentlemen, I do not see any other hands raised. Are there any other questions or comments based on what you see on the screen at this moment? If there are no no's, speak up now, and we will say that that is consensus from the committee. All right then, thank you so much.
Mr. Chair, I just want to mention that we have Mark Nightingale on the call, and any new members, if they may have joined, please announce yourself.
Right, yes, Mr. Nightingale, welcome. Welcome to the meeting. Thank you so much. Any other members, committee members who have joined and missed the roll call, speak up now, please. Okay, hearing none, I show Mr. Nightingale has arrived, and there are 16. Mr. Nightingale, can you hear me?
Yes, I'm here. Sorry for being late.
Thank you so much for announcing your presence. I appreciate it. All right then, Tammy, back to you.
Okay. Last meeting, we introduced transportation focus group topics and announced that we would be scheduling those meetings soon. After an internal meeting of planning staff, our chief transportation planner, the fire marshal's office, and individuals within the office of the city engineer, and additional coordination, we discovered that the complexity of the issues warranted more time. Therefore, so as not to rush any decisions and not hold back all of the rest of the work of this committee, these transportation-related topics will no longer be under consideration of this committee within this timeline. The consultant that was hired for research into these issues will still continue the work and provide a final report that we will use at a later time. So just FYI when we discussed it last time.
All right. Yes, I remember it just came up in our last meeting. Questions, subcommittee members, before we move forward? Again, this just came up in our last meeting. And to be frank, I, for one, am not disappointed that this is not going to be under our consideration right now. There's a lot of work to be done here. And as the director said, we are basically nearing the end of our, quote, new information meetings. The rest of this will be focused on language and the ordinances and so on, and community outreach. So Tammy, back to you.
Well, now it's back to Savita Bandy to discuss about the committee's work so far.
Savita, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Tammy, and thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so we talked about all of the work that committee has done. So I'm here today to share with you what all we have discussed so far. So the progress of the committee's work. The first thing the committee worked on was the technical amendments, out of which one of the big ones was notification area. And guess what? After implementing the new ordinance for like a month, we found something that may need some change. So one of the things that was changed was for the notification, the number of days in advance the notice goes out. It used to be 10 days for the sign, and for the notice mail outs to go out, it used to be 7 days. We changed both of them to 20 days with the technical amendments that got adopted in May 2022, just recently. And in applying this ordinance, what we learned is it is important for us to know that the sign is up before sending the letters out. So having both of them 20 days is a problem. So the proposal is to revise this and have a gap of at least 3-4 days to make sure that the sign is up, and then we send the notice letters out. So we propose to change that the sign must be posted 23 days in advance. So it's a minor change that we want to fix whenever it's possible. Until then, we will apply this as a policy. The next topics that we discussed on was conservation districts, and legal department is working on the draft language. We went at least, I think, 2 iterations with our director and our legal department and had discussions. We anticipate that the draft will be available for us sometime very soon. The next item we talked about, discussed with the committee, was buffering for residential buildings and screenings, and lighting is what we discussed. The purpose, this portion also is something we worked extensively with different departments. We worked with Public Works, Solid Waste Department, and also Public Works related to lighting. And after different departments looked at the language, we are working with legal department in the draft language for that. So this is also very soon will be available for our committee members, all of you to review. Mr. Chair, do you have a question?
Let me open up the table. I want to note that I just looked in the chat and said, see that Zion Escobar has joined us, has been with us for some 20 minutes. Ms. Escobar, are you there?
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Great. We just want to make sure that the record shows that you're in attendance. Thank you. All right, Savita, I'm sorry, your last question. We want to open up to the floor for questions.
Not yet. I just saw you ask me for a pause, so I just paused.
No, that's why. Yes, thank you. Go right ahead, please.
Okay, so after buffering, we talked about different topics as part of a whole overall housing concept. The focus of the housing concept was to talk about missing middle housing, accessory dwelling units, and talk about other types of housing that are not available in Houston, like courtyard style housing. And then we also discussed rare access for narrow lots. So all of that, starting from multi-unit residential to garage apartments to courtyard style developments to rare access, all of this is packaged into one overall housing concept. And what we have developed with the committee's work in last few months was developing recommendations. And right now what we are doing is we are preparing material that we can share in terms of a common man's language, the images that we can communicate with the community and spread the word out about these recommendations. So next slide, please. Okay, so here is a timeline of where we are. So we are reviewing the recommendations with the public and creating awareness about these recommendations so that we can get input and feedback from the communities. So that's what is happening right now. And this timeline here also shows where different pieces are. Reserves and multifamily is the last topic that new topic that we will be presenting, as you heard from Tammy today. And with the recommendations that we discussed just now, we will provide those information also as a one-pager document available at Let's Talk Houston. So that's the plan. And I want to pause here and ask if there are any questions.
Thank you, Savita. Committee members, are there any questions about what you've seen so far? Comments? If I may, just a round of applause for all of you and staff. I know it's been 2 years. It's kind of amazing when you have one meeting a month, you kind of forget where you've been and where you're going. And I really appreciate Savita and the staff and the department putting everything together so that we can see it all at once. All right, Mr. Davis, I see you have your hand up. Do you have a comment or a question?
Just a comment. The staff has done a great job in plowing through a snore and making it more transparent for everyone. What would be helpful, and I'm not sure if this is practical, we do all of this regulatory work to some end. And if through an introductory narrative or a closing narrative, this work could be contextualized to an overall end or vision of where we'd like to see the city go. Again, this is not like a planning document. This is more regulatory work. And yet it would be helpful, I think, to bring a broader interest of the community in as to what these regulatory changes are intended to do overall. What are we trying to do when we talk about unlivable city? So some narrative to that effect would be very helpful to contextualize all this work so it doesn't just look like dry legal planning stuff. But the work that you guys have done and how you've organized it for us to kind of deal with it has been amazing. So I really do appreciate the effort. And this is not a criticism at all, but it's I want some of the effort underlying all this, the thought underlying all this, to be a bit more transparent, if it is all possible.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that comment. I think it definitely will help to have it all together. The consultant team is actually working on a guide that will put all of the topics that we discussed together in order to promote and discuss the goals and ideas of Livable Places project itself. So for reference, in future, if we have to go back and look at why we did what we did and what was the discussion and the thought process, I think it will be available and a good place to go back and review. So, and without all of you, without the committee, none of this would have been possible. So really appreciate all of your guidance.
Thank you, Savita. Director Wallace-Brown.
Yeah, so I want to add, thank you, Curtis. I think that's a terrific suggestion. One thing I do want to remind the committee is where we've come from. As you may recall, for those of you that were with us at the very beginning, this list of items that we've presented to you were derived from the various plans that were created for Houston and the Houston area in the past. Many of these items, ADUs specifically, came directly out of Resilient Houston. Many of them came out of Plan Houston, which was developed back in 2016 or 17. So compiling all that information back into one place brings it all full circle. And I think it's a terrific idea, but I do want to remind you that these were not lists that we simply went through and picked and chose on our own. These were things that you and the Houston community and the city council, through their approval of these previous plans, have instructed us to do. The reason for this committee's name is that we are implementing plans that have already been developed in the past. This is an implementation committee. So, yeah, I think wrapping it up and bringing it all full circle is a great idea, Curtis, but I wanted to remind people, particularly those that are new to this, where the ideas came from originally. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. That's so much more eloquent than myself, but I just was going to point to the fact that we are the action committee, actually getting all these plans and these ideas that came from Walkable Places, Resilient, Plan Houston, and actually putting them into real effect. All of those committees did wonderful work, and now, as you say, we're pulling from those places to make them real and make them part of our city ordinance and our rules. Anyone else? I see no other hands raised.
If I could just add one more thing, I'm sorry.
Go right ahead, Director.
I speak with a lot of people across the nation about Houston and about planning, and we get the same comments that from just about everybody, and that is, well, I didn't realize Houston had planning. And
Right.
my response is always, we have a great deal of well thought out, very well vetted, very intentional plans on Houston and its future. Our challenge, as with many cities, has often been implementing them. And so you, this group that we've been working with, are our key implementers. You've done an amazing job bringing Houston off paper, out of a plan, and into reality. And so the work you've done, the disagreements and the debates and the discussions we've had in this group have really been one of the strongest efforts in Houston's recent history to move from a plan on a shelf to actually putting things and changing our future, changing our urban core's future. And so you should all be commended and thanked for the hard work that you've done. And I am anxious to see how all of this does play out then in language, and how we start getting the red line language back from the legal department, and where that takes this conversation, because I know there's going to be continued conversations about, well, I don't like the and versus the or and all of that. So thank you for the hard work you've put into it so far, and that you will continue to put into it.
Thank you,
Can we
Director
go to the
Walton.
next slide? Sorry, can
Yes,
we go to the
Savita.
next slide, please? Okay, so next meeting, we will not have a meeting in August, so we wish you all a great summer. Maybe it's time for a vacation. But our next meeting will be on September 6th, and we anticipate being able to talk to you more about engagement, and also maybe we'll have some ordinances to look at that time that are in draft stages right now. So that's what we plan for the next meeting on September 6th at 3 p.m. With that, I would like to give it to Lynn to talk about next steps with us.
Lynn.
Thank you, Savita, and thank you, Co-Chair Garza. Good afternoon, committee members. What you see on the screen comes out of the engagement strategy for Livable Places. The strategy is shown in two phases. Phase 1 is concluding this month. It started with the beginning of the Livable Places Action Committee meetings, kicking off in September 2020. Items included in Phase 1 include seeking engagement by the public, really going to the public, asking them to participate and provide comments along the way as we discuss different options. We seek to educate the public not only about the core concepts that we're discussing, but as well as existing development standards, best practices from other cities, and to be able to discuss the solutions that work for Houston. We want to understand that participation in surveys and homework activities helps the staff to understand what the concerns are of the public and what the public's preferences are. This helps to make a better product all the way around. Project updates have been included in the monthly planner that the planning department sends out. If you're interested in going back to look at any past newsletters, you can find them on the planning department's website under publications. This engagement strategy also includes updates to the Super Neighborhood Alliance, the Greater Houston Builders Association, and the Houston Real Estate Council. So now we're in the summer of 2022, and we're transitioning to phase 2. And phase 2 will take us through 2023. It includes things like making sure our materials are more user-friendly to explain the concepts that we're talking about, creating a standard meeting in the box that can be taken to any meeting to explain the concepts and recommendations that the committee has put forward. We're trying to use more images. So if you visit us online on any of our social media sites or the websites, you should see infographics to help explain these concepts. We seek opportunities to talk with civic clubs, professional associations, advocacy groups, and any other groups that are interested in learning about what we're doing. And the goal is to inform the public so that they can participate and give comments on the process. Next slide, please. So I've mentioned providing comments several times. We feel that this is very important so that we can understand how the public feels about the recommendations that are being discussed. So the overall housing recommendations document and the proposed recommendations for narrow lots, that document will stay on letstalkhouston.gov, letstalkhouston.org/livable-places. You can find those documents under the proposed amendments tab, and an opportunity to not only read and review these documents if you haven't already, but to also comment. We're continuing to collect comments on these. As listed in the second bullet under phase 2 that you saw on the previous slide, staff are available to come to a meeting that you might be holding. Staff can come with that meeting in the box to explain the recommendations and receive comments. If you're interested in having staff come out, you may reach out to either Savita Bandy or Tammy Williamson at 832-393-6600, and either can schedule a presentation and come out to your meeting. I also really urge the Livable Places Action Committee members that you serve as ambassadors for this process. We need your help in communicating these recommendations. You will see on social media postings. We urge you to share those postings as well as reach out to Savita or Tammy to schedule a meeting in the community. For those that have already made comments, please use the buttons on the website to help share this information. And if you gather along my talking about this, the theme is spread the word. Next slide, please. The ADU design book. The planning department held a design competition for accessory dwelling units, or ADUs. The winning design out of the competition is entitled Double House and is included and highlighted in the ADU Hue design book. And if you can see my camera on the screen, we now have the book, the design book, printed in a printed book. You can find the book in digital format online at letstalkhouston.org/ADU, or you can order your own hard copy of the book from the same website. The goal is to increase knowledge about ADUs as a housing option in Houston. ADUs are currently possible in Houston, and the design book shares several beautiful designs for neighborhoods that allow ADUs in their deed restrictions. One great thing about ADUs is because they're generally located in the back of a property, they do not necessarily change the look and feel of a community along the street. Designers of each of the designs that are included in the book, their contact information is included in the book as well. Unless there are any questions, I can turn it back over to Savita Bandy.
Thank you, Lynn. Savita.
Yes, sir.
Go right ahead, please.
Yes, here is the contact information. If committee members or if anyone public who's watching the meeting, if you want us to come to your community and wish for us to do a presentation and explain the goals and the recommendations of Livable Places, we'll be more than happy to do so. You can reach us at livableplaces@houstontx.gov. With that, we are ready for public comments, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you so much, Savita. I am looking in the chat and I do not see anyone listed. Mr. Calvert, do we have anyone listed in the chat that I might be overlooking?
No, not at this time.
All right, then. For those of you that are listening and have not signed up in the chat but have a comment for this subcommittee, now would be your opportunity to speak up. So I'll just open the floor. Is there anyone here who wants to address the subcommittee and staff with what you've heard and seen today? Wow, that's a first. Hearing none, I will close the public hearing then. All right, so, excuse me, public comment section. All right, so at this point in time, committee members, any comments, any questions before we move forward? Hearing none, I will now take this up.
Mr. Garza, you've done a great job in facilitating these meetings, man.
Thank you so much, sir. You know what, I look at it as just herding cats. I can assure you that's how I look at it. But it's been, thank you so much for your involvement. It has been a real learning experience for all of you. And I know that the curve sometimes is very steep, but it's really gratifying to have all of you on the subcommittee and have your input and have your commentary, because it's so important for us to have as we move forward. So again, now that you've done all this hard work and staff is continuing on with this hard work, we'll now be reaching out to the community for their input before we go further. So thank you so much, Mr. Davis, for your comment. All of you on the subcommittee, thank you so very much. You're not done yet. You have a reprieve in August, but we'll be meeting again in September. So if there's no other commentary, I will adjourn this meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it. We appreciate you being part of Livable Places Action Committee. Thank you. Happy summer.
Thank you, Sonny.
Everyone, have a good one.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you again.
Thank you, everyone. Great job, team.